Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast on Friday morning from beautiful Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where the one and only Doris Burke and I were both in attendance for Game 6 last night. And it didn't go the way the very loud and very raucous Philadelphia 76ers fans hoped it would. It looked like it was going to go that way when they had stormed back from a 14, 16-point deficit. Bang, bang, George Niang hit some threes. Joel Embiid was starting to get rolling. James Harden was missing everything, but that's okay. Joel Embiid was starting to get rolling. And then the wheels fell off in the fourth quarter. The Philadelphia 76ers scored 3 points in the last 5 minutes and 57 seconds of the game. The big fella, the MVP, barely touched the ball. And Jayson Tatum shook off what was about to be an all-time postseason game. A game that would have thrust the Celtics into an uncertain, somewhat uncertain anyway, offseason. And now, just like last year when they lost Game 5 at home and won Game 6 in Milwaukee, Game 7 of the second round is in Boston on, I believe, Sunday. Doris Burke, how loud was that crowd last night, by the way? That was deafening.
Oh, my gosh. I hit the talk back button at the start of our broadcast saying, this may be the loudest arena I have been in this year. They were ready to go. And I saw Jaylen Brown because I was amazed at sort of the staid nature of the Boston Garden in Game 5. It sounded quiet, and obviously the start didn't help. So Jaylen Brown begging them to be as loud. But I just want to go back to what you said about Jayson Tatum, because I have so many friends in New England. As you know, I spent part of the year up there in Rhode Island, and I had a couple of Celtics fans in the business of TV. I had just New England friends who are big Boston Celtic fans saying he'll never shake this. This will be attached to his reputation forever. This is as bad as somebody can play in this scenario. And for Jayson Tatum to start 1 for 14, Zach, and have the self-belief, that unshakable self-belief that superstars have, that I don't care if I miss, you have to be willing. I think it was Paul Pierce who said something like, you have to be willing to miss 20 straight shots and continue to shoot the basketball. Just an incredible response in the fourth quarter. And boy, oh boy, the one thing I'd say is I'm interested in something, and I'm wondering if you're watching this at all. Where is that in-between game of Jayson Tatum? The game where, down the stretch, and it's all sort of running together for me, where he makes big shots to close the game. He had the fadeaway mid-range jump shot. You got to make tough twos at this time of year. And he feels like, and I've got to, I don't know if you can pull up his shot chart right now. It's threes or rim. And I'm like, sometimes we got to get to where he likes those spots. Am I crazy?
No, and he airballed a layup in transition with his left hand. That was contested, but when he airballed that layup, I was like, "Oh my God, is this like one of those games?" And then, like you said, it was threes at the end over Maxey, a couple of step back threes on switches. He worked a lot on his floater. His floater was kind of 3 seasons ago, was kind of a joke among Boston fans. Like, oh, here comes another Tatum floater, that'll miss. And he got better at it. And last year in the playoffs, their best offense was like hunt the mismatches with Tatum and Brown and shoot over guys. And sometimes they kind of lose the plot a little bit. But yeah, he rescued. I mean, he didn't just rescue it. It was like he had more points in 90 seconds than he did in the entire previous, 40 whatever minutes of the game. It was like it was an avalanche out of nowhere.
Yeah. In 40 seconds, I believe he had 7 points, and he had, or maybe it was 6 points in 40 seconds, whatever it was. And the rest of the game, he had 7. So what a response. And how about pulling the trigger on the switch to Robert Williams in the starting lineup for Joe Mazzulla? And it's funny, in talking to Doc Rivers, and this, we're like 75 and 60 minutes or 90 and 75 minutes. We sit down with the coaches, and I think Shams had already put it maybe out on Twitter or something that this might be a possibility. And you guys know these coaches don't miss anything. And, Doc surmise, we wonder if they pull a trigger. We've been thinking that this might be coming here. And sure enough, the Celtics make that move. And, boy, the rim protection that Rob provides, the space he jams up without staying with Joel. So on any spin, Robert's there. And the ability for him to fly out and contest, just pretty great stuff. I like the move. I know Joe Mazzulla. I mean, if you listen to him talk, it's all spacing, it's all playmaking, it's all 3-point shooting. And when we asked him pregame about the switch, the very first question Mark Jones asked him is just like every other play-by-play guy, coach, your starting lineup for tonight, or we've had this series 3 games, so he says same starting lineup, and Joe says, nope, actually we're making the switch. What'd you think?
I thought it was long overdue.
Yeah.
The very first thing I said about this series before, I believe before it was even cemented as a second round series, was it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago on this podcast, like this feels like a Robert Williams, Al Horford series. And I specifically said Robert Williams on PJ Tucker to Rome, Horford on Embiid. It just makes sense. And this whole series, I've been saying, I just don't understand what's happened to the Boston Celtics big man rotation. They never play the 2 bigs that got them to the finals last year. I understand you want to go to this other look where it's worked for you all season with Horford at the 5. It's a great look. It's like a core part of your identity. And in this series, it forces Embiid out of the paint. And so your driving attack has a lot more space to operate, and that's their bread and butter. But to have it just excised completely really confused me. The Grant Williams thing is still completely baffling to me. I just don't understand what happened. So to me, I've been waiting for this move the whole series, and I wish people could see I have an extensive notes file on every series that I'm typing game to game. And starting in game 3, I start writing, should they start RW? I abbreviate all the players for brevity's sake in my insane note-taking on my Google Docs, because it was very obviously the only way the Celtics were going to get minutes, extensive minutes, with him and PJ Tucker on the floor at the same time. Doc Rivers, as I've said all the last week or so, has essentially played Robert Williams to the fringes of this series by not letting him be on the floor with one of their non-shooters, who are really just Tucker and McDaniels, who's not even playing anymore. As soon as Robert Williams comes in the game, Tucker out, Niang in. As soon as Robert Williams comes in the game, McDaniels out, Niang in, Melton in, whoever. And it was very obvious that the only way they were going to get those minutes was with Robert Williams starting, unless, and that's the subplot for the next game, do the Sixers make a starting lineup change to get PJ Tucker out of the starting 5? That's a painful one, even if it makes sense, because he's been so core to their leadership, their identity, their toughness, their offensive rebounding. But to your question, I just couldn't believe it took this long. And it makes me think, and I think you and I have heard a little bit of this too, I think there was a fair amount of internal dialogue, let's say, within the Celtics about this move.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think the head coach was like the driver of making this move. That's not abnormal. Like, all teams have debates and discussions and people are pulled in different directions. I just can't believe it took this long.
Yeah. Well,
better late than never.
100%. And it's a striking contrast from a year ago with Ime Udoka, who, to your point about Grant Williams and Robert Williams, felt like every string pulled by Ime was defensively oriented, where every string pulled by Joe seems much more about spacing. He likes the defensive 5 on Al Horford. He thinks that helps their offense function. He likes playmaking on the floor. I agree with the Grant Williams thing. And here's one thing that I mean, Robert Williams, Zach, was averaging 18 minutes per game in the series prior to yesterday. And it's very hard when somebody doesn't start to get them to 28, 32, 35 minutes. I literally asked Joe, once he told us the starting lineup switch, I said, Joe, I'm trying to basically wrap my mind around what's gone on with Robert this year. Obviously, slow start because of the offseason knee surgery. comes back, starts for, I believe, 20 games, gets the hamstring, and then never makes it back into the starting rotation. And therefore, his impact had been limited. And after what we saw last year, you're thinking this young man's on a trajectory to grow and grow and grow. They start involving him a little bit more offensively, right, with the dribble handoffs and doing some things. You saw his threat as a vertical threat at the rim in a couple of moments last night.
The Smart Williams two-man game was a little, when they were like wheezing, they got a dunk out of it, and I think free throws out of it too.
And think about Marcus has a brilliant basketball game, but he made 2 lob passes that weren't on target, or there could have been a couple more dunks for them. So yeah, I am fascinated, and your point about PJ is so well taken, because and I want your perception on this. I think there's 1:52 left in the game. Philadelphia had a bad possession, but it's 8 points, Zach, with 1:52. This is an eternity. And I just blurted out on the air because I was stunned by it. Embiid and Harden were so frustrated that they stopped playing. They were walking up the court in defensive transition. And I'm saying the game is not over. And they're walking up the floor. And see, it's those little moments where PJ and Tobias, you see the effort, the diving on the floor, the going to scrap out a loose ball. And the moment it'll go down in Philadelphia lore, Zach, if Philadelphia can go on the road and win, the moment in the game where Al Horford blocks, so I'm going back, obviously, a couple of games, the moment Al has blocked Joel 3 times in the game, I don't think Joel was, it felt like he had become passive all of a sudden. I'm thinking he's getting blocked. Now his knee is bothering him. And it took a PJ Tucker offensive rebound score and then get in the grill of Joel Embiid and say, there isn't anybody who can guard you one-on-one. And one of the things I think, and I asked Doc this pregame, Zach, one of the things I think Doc has had to do all year, and this has nothing to do with X and no. I said, Doc, can you correct something if this is a misperception on my point? I said, I feel like one of your greatest jobs this year has been to convince this team that they have enough, but that this will be hard and that it's going to be little moments that decide what has to happen. And, he sort of humbly asked the question, but I believe that. I believe 100% he has had to convince this group that they have enough to win a championship, because this, there's moments in a playoff series when your opponent puts enough pressure on you, or things aren't going your way offensively, or whatever, just the hard moments that inevitably come in a playoff series. And he's had to convince them. And that emotional terrorism line, I freaking loved it. This is hard as hell. It's hard. It's hard winning in this league. And as great as these players are, there are moments of doubt or weakness or lack of confidence or whatever. And you got to flex your way through it. You got to believe, just like Jayson Tatum did last night.
So the possession you're talking about, and I just rewatched the last 5 minutes of the game to remind myself what in the hell was Philadelphia doing on offense in those 5 minutes. And I saw that possession. I was at the game, so I wasn't listening to your call. And I heard you say you were aghast, and it came through on the broadcast. That possession was walk it up, because that's all they're going to do is always walk it up. Harden, Embiid, pick and roll. Embiid has 17 post touches in this game. That's his second most in any game this season and most in the playoffs. 0 of those 17 came in the last 5 minutes of the game. 0. I just rewatched all of them. Harden, wow. Embiid, pick and roll, switch. Yeah. Embiid has Jaylen Brown at the nail. That's his office. That's his sweet spot. Harden has Horford on him on a switch. And, that's been a good battle. So Horford's had some wins and Harden's had some wins, including in game 1.
Big time.
And Embiid, it was almost as if he knew he's not going to give me the ball, or we've been just running the offense through James and Tyrese a little bit in these last 5 minutes. He didn't really even try to get to seal Jaylen at the nail. And he kind of just let Jaylen deny him the ball. And then in a second, just kind of turned and faded to the rim for a potential offensive rebound. Harden drove at Horford. Horford stoned him, stood him up. I don't know if he blocked it or it was just an ugly miss. It was something. And that's the possession you're talking about. And that was Philly's offense down the stretch. I mean, Joel missed one pick and pop jumper. Melton and Tucker both missed wide open threes off that pick and roll that they're giving them. I mean, Melton and Tucker going 2 of 11 from 3 last night was more or less the game. And Melton missed some like, oh my God, would you like to have those back kind of looks?
And if you correct me if I'm wrong, but he was 40% in the series. He made 157 in the regular season, career high. I think he's been such an important acquisition defensively. Like his ability to stay in front of the ball and keep pressure on the ball is really something else. But boy, oh boy, you are 100% right. PJ and Deanthony. And Deanthony had some looks. They're going to get looks, right? They're putting so much emphasis on Joel and James that those guys are going to get looks, and they got to make those shots. And I got to say this, it's been such an interesting series for Al Horford because, the conversation of calling himself an elite shooter and then watching the struggles. And again, he continues to be such a prideful, smart, tough individual defensive player that even when he's missing shots, he's having such an important effect on the series. And we caught this moment a couple of times, and the way the game plays with some of the sponsorship elements and all the things you've got to do in the course of a broadcast, you can't always get back to some of the compelling video that we have. And all game long, Zach, and credit to my director and our cameramen who are just absolutely brilliant at what they do. We'll be in timeouts and they'll say, hey, look at this. Al Horford was as communicative on the bench and in the face of, like, there's a play first half. Jayson Tatum is, lower box. He's checking Maxey in the corner and he falls asleep. And Maxey just straight line drives him, dunk. And it was when they had built that early lead and Philadelphia makes a push. And it's always those segments of the game, right? You've built the lead, but those 2 or 3 minute segments, you just let them back in, and Tatum fell asleep. And Horford gave them the business in the next timeout. And I am just so fascinated by those moments. You said something, I want to go back to it, since you watched the last 5 minutes, and I've spent the morning packing to go up to Rhode Island this morning.
Well, look, there's a Wawa next to my hotel, so I loaded up on coffee, DB. I'm ready. Wawa got me ready. Sponsored by Wawa. I get no money for this. Wawa. I don't know what their slogan is. Wawa. It's good.
Oh, it's great. Wawa in Philadelphia, it's a big deal. I marvel. My son-in-law loves Wawa. But that down the stretch of the last 5 minutes, how much did Maxey have the ball in that 2-man game in that final 5.5+ minutes?
Some, not as much as Harden, and there was no force. There was no force behind anything they did. There was no north-south force behind anything they did. And Joel just wasn't as involved enough. I want to zoom out. You mentioned Horford, and that got me. Horford's urgency. I mean, he wants this. He wants a championship. He also wants to beat Philly. The fans hate him. It's like visceral. We got to just stop for a second and talk about, like, this game on Sunday in Boston. This is as big a game as exists in the second round of the NBA playoffs. These are two titanic NBA teams.
Yeah.
Two historic all-time rivals.
Yeah.
In a game 7, knowing the winner of this series is going to be favored to win the conference finals against Miami or New York. Yep. Knowing Phoenix is out, the Memphis is out, if you cared about Memphis. I mean, the West team, I'm going to talk about the West later, is going to be really, really good. Like, whether it's Denver, Golden State, Lakers, that's going to be, let's just call it a 50-50 series. Let's not look too far ahead to the finals. Just say it's going to be a tough series. but it's there for these teams.
Oh yeah.
Boston.
Think about what's facing these organizations. Go ahead.
Just got the All NBA news yesterday.
Yes, they did. $600 million.
And you are faced with a decision immediately.
Yeah.
Supermax Jaylen Brown or what? Because there's not going to be a negotiation there, I don't think. That's a Supermax or uh-oh. Philly. Everyone in the league has been talking about James Harden going to Houston for a year.
Right.
If they lose in a demoralizing way in Game 7,
yeah,
I have no idea what the hell is going to happen with that team. Nobody could possibly have any idea what's going to happen with that team. If Harden leaves, they don't have, as of now, the flexibility to like go out and get Chris Middleton or something like that. If Harden leaves and they've lost again in this same round and again in a heartbreaking fashion, I mean, I don't. Joel Embiid's under contract for quite some time. I don't know how he will feel about everything if his co-star and pick and roll partner walks out the door and they've lost. I mean, these are the stakes in a game. This is as big a game as can possibly happen at this stage of the playoffs. I mean, that's just is.
No, these are the high leverage moments for organizations that believe they have enough to win a championship. And it's funny, as at our production meeting, you talk like at the top of the show, what do you discuss? And that was our discussion, was like the loser of this series is going to have some foundational earthquakes moving under their feet because of, as you said, the rumors all year have been Harden.
Well, think about Philly. They have a chance to win at home. Biggest game of their season. They have this incredible road win. And yeah, Boston shot horribly. They took that win in Boston.
Yeah.
The crowd just bloodlust last night. It felt like it was there and then it wasn't. Think about Boston. Imagine if they lose this series at home in Game 7. That's bad enough itself. Losing at home in Game 7. That hurts. It's not bad. I mean, Philly can win Game 7. I'm saying it just hurts to lose Game 7 at home. Then you look back and say, boy, Game 1 without Embiid, we lost. Game 4, up 5 with 2 minutes to go after hitting 2 just gut punch threes, punch knockout blow threes. We lose. We have the last possession fiasco where we don't get a shot off. We have the other last possession fiasco where we bizarrely guard Embiid with Marcus Smart and he hits James Harden for a go-ahead 3. Think about, like, you never get over that. No. The only way you get over that is by winning the series. You never get over those things if you lose the series.
So I want to go back to something you said about Jaylen Brown. Do you have any reservations at all about the pairing of Jaylen and Jayson?
I mean, only in the sense of there is some degree of positional and skill overlap between them. Like Tatum is unbelievable. It looks like he's going to top out as like a 5 or 6 assists a game kind of guy. I don't know what he averages here. I'm guessing it's around there.
Yeah.
Jaylen Brown is perpetually just 1-to-1 assist to turnover ratio.
Absolutely.
And there were a couple of plays last night where they teamed up in a pick and roll. And every time they do that, I smile because you're like, all right, this is what we want. The 2 stars cooperating and blah, blah. And all it ends up doing is having PJ Tucker and Tobias Harris switch. And they're the 2 best Philadelphia defenders on the floor in a lot of these minutes. And over in the corner is Marcus Smart with Tyrese Maxey on him. And in the other corner is Malcolm Brogdon with James Harden on him. You're like, well, I kind of would like those guys to be involved instead of the guys you're involving. So just like tiny, but their track record is just one of enormous success. Like nothing's perfect, right? Like that's the risk you run in like doing these alternate visions of like, what if we traded Jaylen Brown for X, Y, and Z? Okay, well, what's the X, Y, and Z going to be? What message is that going to send to Jayson Tatum, who is a first-team All-NBA player who's ready to win right now? And yeah, would you ideally, if you had to construct an ideal second player for Jayson Tatum, might it be Joel Embiid? Might it be Giannis? Might it be, those are obvious ones, but could it be like what everyone thinks Evan Mobley will be in 4 years? Maybe be, but this is pretty damn good. Like it's not perfect, but it's pretty damn good.
Right, right. All right. So then one other topic, because I'm, you know, Jayson Tatum start. I think Michael Jordan in 1997 and James Harden in 2019. Um, he joined those guys in futility in the first quarter or first half of a playoff game. Is there a way, and we asked this to Joe, do you try to get him something, Jayson Tatum, early? A physical rim finish, something, even a mid-post turnaround jump shot. Have you ever seen this where a first quarter in 3 consecutive games has been that abysmal? And there's been times where Jaylen Brown's starts have masked his inability to score. Does that slow start in any way concern you for him? And if you're the coach, are you leveraging something, whatever your best play is, to try to get him started, or even run the offense through him? Because normally Jaylen is super aggressive in that first period, right? He straight line drives you, or he gets to a 3 on a catch and shoot situation. Do you think that is at all significant?
Yeah, I'd like to see Jayson Tatum get going, and I think they will. I mean, they run their stuff, right? And their stuff is, on ball and off ball actions involving their best players and Maxey or Embiid. They've been trying to get Embiid involved, and they ran it. And maybe in the first quarter, you tell Jayson Tatum, hey, instead of just sort of passing off to the next, passing the baton to the next guy, if you have Tyrese Maxey, just go for it. If you have I don't know, just, yeah, I would. But you're right. Jaylen Brown in first quarters is like Michael Jordan cross with Shaq for like 5 minutes, and then it doesn't last. I know you have to go. Can we get into a couple of things really quickly?
Sure.
I want to read you some stats to the degree that this has been a shot-making series. Like whoever shoots better wins.
Wins, yeah.
Free throws for the series. You ready? Philadelphia 130 attempts. Boston 129 attempts.
Wow.
Turnovers for the series. Philadelphia 69 turnovers, Boston 71 turnovers.
Wow.
Offensive rebounds for the series. Boston 53, Philadelphia 50. Like all the sort of other ingredients are absolutely dead even, and Boston has just outshot Philly. Robert Williams and Al Horford last night, +9 together in 19 minutes. And I want to go through with you the sequence of these games and why that substitution was important. In game 3, you were there. You had the call. I think. Were you on game 3 in Philly?
Was I on game? So I did, yeah, because we did 3 and 4. And
yeah.
then,
So 3 is the Boston win, and
yeah,
it's the game in which Boston kind of tweaks its pick and roll defense to basically say, we're staying at home on Embiid. We're not giving him easy nail catches. And
yeah.
James, we're giving you a driving lane. We're just giving it to you. Like we're going to open up and give you a driving lane. And
Okay.
we're going to have who's ever on Tucker ready to help as like a second layer of defense. Your guy's going to give you an alley. Horford's going to stay on Embiid. And we're going to dare you to beat us with the drive. And you were astonished that it got in his head. He was passing out of stuff. He was hesitant.
He became so indecisive that there was a moment where he turns the corner and he almost travels by hitting the ground before he makes just a god-awful pass that gets tipped out of bounds. It's James freaking Harden. His indecision blew me away. So sorry.
So in game 4, credit to James Harden, who, by the way, can he just have a normal game? He's had one normal game, 1, 2 transcendent games, and 3 like, oh yeah, that's James Harden in an elimination games. Like, can we just, all he needs to do is be normal, and the Sixers usually win. But anyway, in game 4, to his credit, he knew that defense was coming, and he said, yeah, I wasn't great in game 3. I'm going to take what you give me in game 4. I'm going to take that driving lane and see what happens. And that righted Philadelphia in game 4 and game 5. And he realized if that second layer of defense is Marcus Smart or Jaylen Brown or Jayson Tatum, like if I have momentum, I can get through those guys and get to the line. He's averaging 7 free throws a game after a slow start in this series. And that's when the Celtics made their change. That second layer of defense is now going to be a 7-foot guy who can jump out of the gym.
Yeah.
And that was necessary and it worked. And Harden essentially forced their hand by playing better against that defense, to his credit. And now I'm assuming that lineup starts again in game 7, and Philly will have tough decisions to make. Like, Doc has had a quicker hook with Tucker. He's playing the 3 guards together more. We'll see what they do, but it's been a fun chess match, huh?
Oh my gosh. So to your point, because I was curious about this, the Embiid Harden pick and roll, obviously the most productive pick and roll tandem by far. James, the most assists to Joel by far. As you said, they decided the free throw line and nail was where Joel was going to operate. So in games 2, 3, and 4, they got a total of 9 jump shots for Embiid. Game 5 alone, they got 9 jump shots for Embiid. So he makes the 10 free throws and all jumpers in a 30-plus point game and didn't have a score in the restricted area.
And you know what they did? When he got rolling in that game, and you saw it a little bit last night when he got one pick and pop jumper at the nail, they took Horford off of him and put Smart on him or Brown on him and said, we're taking away your pick and roll. It's becoming too easy. We're going to switch. And that looms, and I know you got to go, that looms as maybe the other most interesting subplot of game 7 is how often does Boston do that? And how can Philly counter it? Because the Celtics are bothering him with those guys fronting him and denying and killing the clock. And it hasn't been as easy as for him. Brogdon, he's had an easier time with, but the other guys are like making it difficult for him. And I feel like if he gets a couple pick and pop jumpers early, we might see Boston go to that and say, solve it. All right, Doris Burke, you got a long drive ahead of you. Unless you have any final thoughts, I want you to get on the road. The Hall of Famer, the one and only. It's so wonderful to see you. I will see you during the next couple rounds at places TBD. Thank you, Doris.
Can't wait. Thank you, Zach.
All right. Doris is gone on the road. I got to get on the road. It's early in the morning. Unable to scramble a second guest for this. So you just got me. You're stuck with me for a bit here on Nuggets Suns. And for the second straight season, the Phoenix Suns season ends in an absolute humiliation at home in this round, down by 9 million points, actually 30 at halftime, without Chris Paul, without Deandre Ayton. And last year was game 7, this year was game 6. So traded a whole bunch of stuff for Kevin Durant, and I guess in a lot of ways got one game fewer, shorter, whatever, in the playoffs. And there is a lot of potential fallout from that. It's hard to lose that way 2 years in a row. 2 different teams, 2 different circumstances, 2 of their big 4, which was reduced to this series to a big 3.25 out. And you just can't, even with Booker and Durant as great as they are, and Booker, his first kind of game of the playoffs last night has just been transcendent the entire postseason. As good as those guys are, if you're a thin team and you lose guys number 3 and 4, it's hard. And you know why it's hard? Because everyone today is going to talk about the Suns and what a disaster it is ending their season this way. How do they fix this? Was the Durant trade a mistake? Is DeAndre Ayton gone? What is Matt Ishbia going to do? What changes are going to be made? Oh my God. You know why they lost? They lost mostly because the Denver Nuggets are awesome. And a lot of the national media has spent the whole year just kind of like patting the Nuggets on the head. Hey, it's a cute team. Look at that. You know, Jokic doesn't jump. And who's their second best player? Jamal Murray. And do we trust Michael Porter? And blah, blah, blah. And that was a mistake. And even now, I've heard skepticism, including on our airwaves, about the idea that the Denver Nuggets, this team in the Rocky Mountains, could beat the Lakers or the Warriors in a 7-game series in the conference finals. I got news for you. They're going to be favorites in that series, whoever they play. If you're sleeping on the Nuggets now, you are just so late to the party. The party ended. The party's over, and you're knocking on the front door, and people are telling you that you're Larry David. The party was yesterday. I had the Nuggets in my inner circle of title contenders to start this season. And people who have listened to this podcast for a long time may remember that when Jamal Murray tore his ACL in, I think, April of 2021, I opened this podcast with like a 15-minute monologue about why that injury was so heart-wrenching. And I said several times I was going to pick the Nuggets to make the finals that year at the start of the playoffs had he not gotten injured. And it was only 8 games. It was 8 games, I think, when Aaron Gordon got traded to the Nuggets. Tim Connolly's last big move for that team. And I think it was 8 games of Aaron Gordon, Jokic, Murray, Michael Porter Jr., and their fifth starters are words like Will Barton. And those 8 games were so utterly dominant. The fit was so seamless with Aaron Gordon. I never shook those 8 games, ever. And it was a small sample, and you don't want to read too much into 8 games. And I know that. And I watched damn near all of them because I wanted to see what this team looked like. And what I saw was jaw-dropping. And I've mentioned before, one of those games was against the Clippers, the team that Denver had humiliated in the bubble. The team that, I mean, the Jamal Murray, Nikola Jokic pick and roll is starting to rack up casualties now. Doc Rivers in Los Angeles, casualty. Montrezl Harrell, never been a relevant player really in the NBA since meeting that pick and roll in that playoff series. And the Nuggets in that regular season game, in that 8-game stretch, the Clippers, they played everybody. And as we know now, it's just not a thing that happens a lot. They played everybody, and they tried really hard to win that game. It was in Los Angeles at what was then Staples Center. And it had the sense of, okay, we're going to try to avenge what happened in the bubble, and you're like, we're playing everybody, we're going for it. And the Nuggets just kicked the absolute crap out of them. So from tip to buzzer, it was never close. You saw exactly why they got Aaron Gordon to defend guys like Kawhi and at least make them work. And they just ran circles, or I guess in Nuggets sort of style, like bobbed and weaved and jogged and cut and passed circles around the Clippers. And then Jamal Murray got hurt. And yeah, I didn't pick the Nuggets to win the championship or make the finals this year. Preseason, I picked the Clippers. And before the playoffs, I picked the Suns. I think I overestimated Denver's slump in the last 6 weeks of the season. I over-worried about it. Very clearly now they were a team that was not playing possum, but just like, all right, we got the number 1 seed locked up, we're going to coast. And I knew that on some level, but the fact that their slump was really driven by shaky defense, and that was always the question about their team. I think I always over-worried about that. And I picked the Suns in 7 in this series. And look, we don't know how it would have unfolded with CP and Ayton, but this is how it unfolded. But preseason, my inner circle of contenders had 3 teams from the Western Conference: Warriors, Clippers, Nuggets, over the Suns, over everybody else. Like, this team is really good, and it shouldn't be a surprise that they are here now. And first of all the Jokic skeptics that I've heard from for the last 2 years after voting him MVP each of the last 2 years, easily, frankly, not this season. I voted for Embiid because of that last 6 weeks. And I kept saying this and I kept writing this, like, everyone, what has Jokic done in the playoffs? What has Jokic done in the playoffs? I'm like, did I miss when they got to the conference finals in the bubble? Here are Jokic's playoff stats now for his career: 27 points a game, 12 rebounds a game, 7 assists a game, 27, 12, and 7 on 53, 41, 59 shooting. Here are Jokic's stats from these playoffs: 31 points, 13 rebounds, 9.7 assists, 55% shooting, 48% from 3, 56% from 2. He's just an all-time great player. And I'm sorry if you've doubted it, because, they lost to the Suns with Facundo Campazzo and Austin Rivers as their starting guards, or they lost to the Warriors last year without Jamal Murray, and the Warriors ended up winning the championship. The Nuggets have now won 6 playoff series in the last now 5 seasons and counting. 1 in 2019, 2 in 2020, 1 in 2021, none last year, and 2 this year. 6 playoff series in 5 playoffs. That doesn't sound amazing, and they haven't gotten to the finals. That's a lot of playoff series wins. You don't win that many playoff series if you're not equipped to win in the playoffs. And the ultimate testament of that is that same offseason, the Clippers and the Nets made their huge, giant offseason splashes. KD and Kyrie in Brooklyn, Kawhi and PG in Los Angeles. In those same 5 playoffs, those two teams combined won 4 playoff series. The Nuggets have won 6. Chalk one up for continuity. And by the way, think about the Nets. Durant out. Kyrie didn't get in. James Harden now has a game 7 in Boston. If he's out, he'll be out. And that what if in Brooklyn, when those 3 were together, they had it. They were the best team in the NBA. They were completely unguardable. Go back and watch that Boston series they won. And then, of course, injuries strike the next round against Milwaukee. Go back and watch that series. It was like, oh, my God. And now they're all elsewhere. And if Boston wins game 7, and that's a 50-50 game, God knows I'm not going to try to predict that. All 3 of them could be out, and Jokic and Murray and Porter and AG roll on. And you know who else rolls on? KCP. Fantastic trade. Loved it immediately, and it's worked out even better than I thought. Bruce Brown, loved this signing at the time by Calvin Booth. It's worked out even better than I thought. Christian Brown, they trusted him. They finally played Aaron Gordon at backup center. They have this roaring, switching defense with those guys on the floor when Jokic is on the bench. And Murray and Jokic together, it's just magic. There's no antidote to it. You can't switch. Can't switch because Jokic will match you in the post. You can't drop because Jokic will pop for threes, or when you close out, pump and drive and ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. And there was one play in game 3 where Jokic, they're just so creative, where Jokic didn't set a screen for Jamal Murray. He stood 15 feet away from Jamal Murray, like he was maybe going to set a screen, and the Suns are like, oh my God, something's happening. Whoever was on Murray opened up his stance, and Murray just like went hard. They got a switch. Murray did his little step back 3. And they just make magic in the dead zone of the mid-range. You know, we watch pick and rolls now, and it's all off the dribble 3, hard roll to the rim. Off the dribble 3, hard roll to the rim. Off the dribble 3, pick and pop 3, hard drive to the rim. These guys kill you with just little cuts. It's death by 1,000 shoulder fakes and bobs and weaves and floaters. And Jamal Murray gets into the lane and he's got a live dribble, and Jokic is slow rolling 18 feet from the basket. Jamal Murray's got you on a string. I'm like, all right, I can pull up here for a mid-range 2, or if I accelerate and go forward, that's going to pull Jokic's guy 2 more feet and get Jokic an 8-foot floater. And by the way, here, Jokic from floater range in the last 2 seasons. So floater range is outside the restricted area, inside the foul line. 62% shooting in each of the last 2 seasons. 62%. That's like bonkers. You can't shots that you can just be like, that's the shot we want to give up. You can't give up. It's like it's almost a layup for him. Just a phenomenal performance in the playoffs so far for Denver. Phenomenal roster building, and Nikola Jokic has announced himself to anybody who was wondering, yeah, he's that good, and he's been this good for a long, long time. He deserved his 2 MVPs, unquestionably. If you want to say he deserved this one, and the playoffs have proved it, I thought Embiid was sensational this year, and he's largely been very good in the playoffs, despite an injury, the annual Joel Embiid, like, do we have to have this happen? Injury, and the Nuggets roll on, and they will be favorites in the next round, and they should be favorites in the next round. Whoever they play. They won't have the star power. They won't have the national profile. Doesn't matter. They're that good. By the way, credit for Michael Malone, too, who made all the right adjustments from the regular season to the playoffs and has pushed the right buttons with that team. Phoenix, oh, my God. Look, when they made the trade, the first thing I said on this podcast was, I will always think back to when the Clippers traded everything to unite Kawhi and Paul George. SGA, all the picks, all the swaps, whatever. And somebody in the league who's very smart who's not affiliated with either of those teams, told me as I was seeking out opinions, and this opinion was like the consensus kind of opinion, but he put it most eloquently, I thought. It could go down. This is what he said about the Clippers trade. It could go down as one of the worst trades in the history of the NBA, but it's also a trade you have to make. And I said I thought about that quote again in the wake of the Durant trade. Not that it like worst trade, one of the worst trades. Like that was a little much. I mean, this is Kevin Durant. But I just think, and everyone shouted back, and I said still, like, again, the clause 2 is it's a trade you have to make. That's a way of saying, fine, make it. Like, I can't say it's a bad trade. It's a good, I can't even say it's not a good trade. It's Kevin Durant. You have to make it. But I think in everyone's exuberance about trades like this, people overlook the downside. And the downside usually hits, like most of these trades don't work. If your standard is you have to win a championship or make the finals, which the Suns did, by the way, 2 years ago. And for better or worse, when you trade everything, and the Suns traded everything, all the picks, the only swap that was tradable in this deal, Mikal Bridges, who's I think probably going to be like a 2-time All-Star. I don't think he's going to be an insane, like perennial All-Star, but he's going to be really good. Cam Johnson, who's a starter and can plug and play on any team. The standard is you got to win. You got to get to the finals and probably win the championship. That's why the AD trade, which is, I think, the closest equivalent in terms of talent out and picks out, is always going to be a success because the Lakers won one. And by the way, AD is the best player on their team. They got a shot at another because he's been that good. The Drew Holiday trade is another comp that comes up a lot. The Bucks won. The price just wasn't the same. The pick outlay was, and it shouldn't have been. It's Drew Holiday and not Kevin Durant. The pick outlay wasn't the same. And the talent out the door wasn't the same. There's no Mikal Bridges that Milwaukee is trading in that trade for Drew Holiday. Most of these trades don't end up working. And you know, it was obvious at the time. The risk of this trade was Kawhi and PG were 28 and 29 when the Clippers got him. Kevin Durant's 34. He's had a bunch of injuries in the last 4 years. Chris Paul's 37 going on 38. He's injured in the playoffs every year. I said it at the time. If one of these guys gets hurt, there are teams where, like the Sixers with Embiid, where if their star player gets injured, it's like a freak injury, and you're like, well, that's just bad luck. What could we have done? We could never have foreseen that. The Suns, I said it then, if one of these guys gets injured during the playoffs, the Suns are not one of the teams who can say, well, we couldn't have possibly seen that coming. You could have seen it coming, and it happened. And now the bill is going to come due. And again, I still think it's a trade you have to make, because when you go through the paths that they could have taken, let's just outline them. Number one, trade Chris Paul and take a step back. This was a middling playoff team, a mid-rung playoff, a good team, not a great team before this trade. So that's path one. They decided not to do that, and I think that was totally justifiable. Go all in on Durant, which was what they did. Make a smaller deal, an incremental deal where it's like some assets out the door, but not this many. And that was, I think, reportedly, Woj reported they were close to a deal for John Collins. And say, does that deal make us good enough to win the West in this kind of weird open-ish season while preserving most of our asset base? And the Suns, I think, correctly concluded, makes us better, but not good enough. Even in this open year, there are just too many good teams. And even that scenario has to factor in the likelihood of Chris Paul getting injured too in the playoffs. And that team's just not good enough. And then the other option is just stand completely pat. Do nothing, keep everyone, keep everything, all the picks, all the players. Do what you do this season. Maybe it's the first round, maybe it's the second round, and move on with everything in the bank. And the Suns decided, probably correctly, let's be clear, probably correctly, that all in was their best chance to win a championship, a singular championship, which is the entire point of the whole goddamn thing. That, yeah, it sounds great to stand pat and keep Bridges and keep Cam Johnson and keep all the picks and hope that grows into something. Well, what is it going to grow into? Mikal Bridges is really, really good. He and Booker, that's a fantastic foundation. Chris Paul's getting old in every scenario. DeAndre Ayton is doing whatever DeAndre Ayton just did in every scenario. Yeah, you got all the picks and all the stuff. So let's say you keep all that. Is that team just as is growing into a championship team? I think that might be a stretch, and the Suns were correct to say that. Then you say, well, okay, but you can keep all that stuff and trade it for a star down the line when the team is quote unquote ready. Well, that's what they did with Kevin Durant. If you're saying hoard everything for a star, that's what they did. And you can say, well, you gotta wait for a star who's 28 or 27 or 26, a perfect fit with Devin Booker, and maybe doesn't cost you all this stuff, and maybe they should have held on to Cam Johnson. Like, okay, is that going to happen? Is that guaranteed to happen? So I think the Suns looked at those 4 paths: small deal, stand pat, trade Chris Paul, go all in, and said, hey, if our goal is to win one, this is the best. This gives us the best chance of doing it. And I said at the time, it doesn't make them overwhelming favorites. It probably doesn't even make them favorites, period. Neck and neck with Denver in the West is what I said. And then you get to the East and it's like one monster team after another. Is that enough? Is being one of the bunch, one of the favorites, neck and neck with the other team in the West, is that enough? Is that good enough to justify the outlay? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I thought probably it was, considering, well, I don't know if that's probably it was, but considering, again, where those other paths take you, it's reasonable for the Suns to say, yeah, even if we're neck and neck, it's worth it. And while that may give you the highest upside, that path, the highest short-term championship equity, it also gives you the highest risk and the worst downside. And I think that's undeniable. Like that stand pat scenario, you could be good for a long time. If your number one worry is I don't ever want to be bad, I don't ever want to be the Nets post Paul Pierce and Kevin Garnett trade, that scenario insulates you from that. But it's not going to maybe get you up here where the Durant trade got you. But, look, I mean, and you want to say, how could the Suns ever, and the Suns analysis was, how could we ever become the Nets post KG and Paul Pierce? Those guys were old. We have Devin Booker and Kevin Durant for 2-3 more years of Durant's prime. We have DeAndre Ayton. We'll be fine. And they're right in the sense that as long as they have Booker and Durant healthy, regardless of what happens with Paul, that should be a 50-win team. Those two guys are that good. One injury, and all of a sudden, it's like, ooh. And one of the reasons that it's like, ooh, is the Ayton thing is now a disaster. And I can't believe how bad Ayton was in these playoffs. I can't believe how miserable everybody looked. I mean, if you go back and watch, and Perk nailed this on NBA Today when he did his little I Spy segment. If you go back and watch, there are like 5 plays in every one of these games where Ayton does something. And usually it's catch the ball at the rim in some traffic. Yeah. But with a little bit of an inside advantage and also being giant. And instead of going up with it, puts it down, dribbles, spins away for a hook. There was one in game, I'm going to forget which game it was. I think it was game 5 in Denver when he did that. And if you zoom in on it, you can see Ish Wainwright on the bench and the guy sitting next to him. But mostly Ish Wainwright, Ayton brings it down to Ish. Oh, demonstrative, like, oh. And there's like 5 of those every game. And the whole idea was, okay, worst case scenario, Durant gets injured. Worst case scenario, Durant ages poorly. We still have Booker and Ayton. What a backstop. And now it's like, do they have Ayton? He got worse. Somehow he got worse. Defensively, he was back to making some of the mistakes that marked like his rookie year where he didn't look like he understood the timing of big man defense, which is understandable and really hard. And he played a different system at Arizona. He didn't look good. And it seems like ancient history now, but that New Orleans series 2 years ago when Booker was hurt, like Ayton has a 28-17 game in that series and like a 23-10 and a 22-7. He looked like a guy in that series who could get you those kind of numbers. And obviously with Durant and Chris Paul, he's not going to get those, and Booker, he's not going to get those kind of touches. But the Suns were so thrilled 2 years ago that he had bought into this more limited role, and he's going to be an unbelievable defender and rim run and finish. And he got worse at that this season. And of course, there was the whole thing about Monty Williams not communicating with him over the offseason. And maybe everybody bears some, not maybe, everybody bears some responsibility for the Ayton thing. Like the relationship seems to be bad across the board. There's obvious moments of tension during every game. The coach and the player admitted not talking to each other the entire offseason after a disaster Game 7. It just seems bad. And going forward, they either got to salvage this, they got to salvage it somehow, whether it's with Ayton or trading Ayton. And by the way, I hate to say it, the other 29 teams all watch this series. Like, I keep having people in the league pitch me like, oh man, Orlando should go get Ayton. Like Wendell Carter Jr. for Ayton. Orlando's got a lot of cap space. I'm like, why is Orlando doing that? Wendell Carter Jr. is really good. I know nobody watches the Magic. He was probably better than Ayton this year. And people are pitching me these trades like, well, Wendell in a first could get a first. Just keep Wendell Carter Jr. He's on a great contract. That's the biggest takeaway, honestly, because once Paul got hurt, and I know they won the 2 games without Chris, and then the Ayton gets hurt. And if you want to be the guy criticizing Ayton for not playing and criticizing AD for not playing, that's cool. You do you. I'm not going to do it. Like, if you're hurt, you're hurt, particularly a head injury like Anthony Davis. I thought that dialogue was a little weird. That's the biggest kind of big thing hanging over the franchise now. And obviously they have a new owner. And I saw Suns fans last night wondering about the future of Monty Williams and the future of James Jones. And frankly, that seems a little much to me. I voted Monty Williams Coach of the Year twice. This is a brand new team, but you just never know with new owners. We'll see what happens. And lastly, the Durant stuff is going to be very, very loud. And they needed him to be transcendent in this series, and he was just good. But I mean, let's not just dismiss 29.5 points a game, 9.5 rebounds a game, 5 assists a game. Let's not pretend that he shrank from the moment or just laid an egg. Those are real numbers. He averaged 30 points a game in this series. He averaged 29 for the playoffs on 48% shooting, but 45% shooting overall in this series, 22% from 3, 51% from 2. I mean, that's below his standards. He struggled at times to get clean looks, and he struggled to make threes the whole series, good threes. They needed him to make them, and he didn't make them. 30 assists and 23 turnovers, I think, for the series. That's a lot of turnovers. And last year against Boston, rather, he had just a straight up what's going on with Kevin Durant kind of series. Lots of puzzling turnovers in that series. And yeah, I've been on the train of Durant's a top 12 player of all time. And this is the kind of thing that at that level, a playoffs like this, which is just good when they needed great, coming off another playoffs that was short and not that good, it might knock you down a peg or two. And you gotta, I guess, be better next time around. They needed him to be transcendent, and he was just good. And it does feel like he's paying some sort of karmic price for the Warriors' decision. It's just unbelievable. He'll never get the credit for the 2 finals MVPs. He's a 2-time finals MVP, and people talk about him like those things don't count. And frankly, he and his people seem astonished that fans don't count those as much as they should. It's not that they totally discount them. They just don't count them as equal to, Dirk's finals MVP or something, and Dirk's championship. And it is because the deck was, to the degree it can never be stacked in a sport where injuries and randomness and other great teams have a lot to say about it. And the Rockets almost beat the Warriors in their second year together with Durant. The deck was heavily weighted, and everybody knows that, and everybody knew it at the time. And we can all reverse engineer well, what quote unquote should he have done? I'm not in the should business. He wanted to go to Golden State, and he did, and he won championships. That's what he wanted. He had fun for some of that run. That's what he wanted. He enjoyed their style. Sometimes that's what he wanted. He didn't stay in Oklahoma City. He didn't go to Washington. He didn't go to Boston. And the Celtics were really, really not confident, but they thought they had a shot to get Durant in 2016. He didn't go to any of those places. He went to Golden State. Then he went to Brooklyn. That's an all-time disaster. Now he's in Phoenix. And in the process of going to Phoenix, the Suns forked over a lot of assets to get him, which is going to make it very, very hard for them to really tweak this team. Bobby Marks has the whole thing. They're at the second apron already. They may not get the tax mid-level exception even. Their trade flexibility is going to be limited. All those new rules are coming into play. And if Phoenix ultimately just becomes like second round exit, what's the next thing? It does unavoidably start to color your it's not perception of him as a player, because I know what Kevin Durant is as a player. We all do. He's Kevin freaking Durant. He's going to be like a top 5 all-time scorer in the NBA with borderline 50, 40, 90 efficiency, and he's 7 feet tall, and he's a very good defender and a good playmaker and all that. Like what I just described is a top 10 to 12 player of all time. Physical stature, statistics, all of it. But there is going to just be something about his career that feels a little off. And I think that's okay. I'm not normally the feels guy. I'm not normally like, he ruined the league and this and that. But it and I said this when he got to Phoenix, like it did feel like the signature something, the signature place, the signature team, the signature championship, the signature moment even. It seems like that is a little bit missing. And he's got moments like, forget the 2-time finals MVP, the 3 over LeBron, all of it. But I do think it's fair to come away from this and be like, man, it just feels a little like something's off. Something's missing. The career arc hasn't arced the way that it quote unquote should, the way that makes you feel good. And Suns got a lot to do this offseason, and that was another second straight disaster last night, and Denver just took it to them. They came out and were like, we're done. We're done with you. We're done with this series. We are not going home for game 7. We're going home to rest and wait for one of these big market teams who everyone thinks is going to beat us because we're just a little Denver over here. And we don't get the respect that we deserve. So that's it for today. Busy week in the NBA. Busy weekend coming up. At least one game 7 tonight. We have 2 more game 6s. I previewed those with Howard Beck yesterday. Enjoy it. What a playoffs round, and we still got 2 to go. Thank you for listening, everybody.